And so, as the industry has evolved, let's kind of take a step back and look at that evolution over the last, say, 10, 15 years. We had the golden era of publishing online, and that was, really largely publisher-owned. Those premium spots were available, but publishers had somewhat of a limited understanding of audience segments, but you were able to offload what you needed to in your online inventory. Then networks started to evolve, and they were capable of taking unsold inventory and doing some analysis on it, understanding behavioral and contextual signals. And in many respects, the networks started to understand target audiences better than the publishers themselves, giving them tremendous power in the process. And then we emerged into this, what I would call power to the DSPs, the demand-side platforms. Or maybe it's a rock band in the 80s, power to the DSPs. But where demand-side platforms came to play is they started to separate the audiences themselves from, the visit on the website and looking at them from a target audience perspective. So you could actually start to look at this from an impression, per impression basis. And you were able to combine online data and cookies with offline data and what you know about your customers and prospects and targets, and giving advertisers a tremendous power at that point, where they were doing real-time bidding, auction-based bidding, and you saw the emergence of, at that point, sell-side or supply-side platforms, which kind of tended to give more power. And we're going to go into the details and definitions of these different players in a little bit. And today, we're really entering the era of programmatic, and that's all about a systematic and machine-based way of offloading inventory in a very efficient and effective way. And so that could be, and today when we talk about RTB, oftentimes we're talking about remnant inventory, could be direct or premium inventory. And now we're starting to see the emergence of supply-side trading platforms, which are also very compelling. And so, Bill is on the phone right now, and Bill, I would love to kind of just have you give some context around what you're seeing, given your relationships with publishers and what you guys are doing today, from a kind of as the industry evolves standpoint.
Sure. Hey, thanks so much, and thank you everyone for joining us. This is a great period of time for publishers. While programmatic has been a challenge for many publishers as they're trying to contend with what does this mean with regard to moving revenue recognition to later in the delivery cycle, literally sort of to the last second, and oftentimes not knowing exactly what you're going to get. The boon that's occurring now is essentially a leveling of the playing field. We are in the early stages of the supply side getting access to some of the same trading tools, and in some cases actually better trading tools than the demand side. It's been a bit of an unfair food fight, and at this point we're just starting to see in our own business at MediaCrossing and elsewhere that publishers now have the opportunity to bring insight into their own inventory and their audiences, so that this becomes a much more beneficial experience for publishers rather than feeling like the demand side is rating them.
We can push that live is your organization actually using this today? And so I'm going to guess that the majority aren't. The answer choices here are A, you're using it for programmatic for remnant only, you're using it for premium only, or both, or you're not using it at all. And so just curious how many organizations that we're talking to today actually use it. So we'll leave it on for another couple seconds here, and then you can go ahead and push it live. It's in the lower right corner.
Ian, one other thing I'd mention here, and that is that there's considerably less overhead required of the publisher that embraces programmatic. It simply does not take as much headcount. It shouldn't cost as much. It really dependent upon the nature of the contracts that you enter into with your vendors. In general, programmatic should be less expensive to create each dollar of revenue and dollar of profit relative to direct sales.
Yeah, go ahead and push the survey results live. Yeah, we're actually going to talk about kind of the pricing model, but that's a really great point that on the overhead and operational efficiency side of things, it's transformational. So, and that's always met with some resistance, or you really want to understand it before you take steps, to embrace it. So there you go. 69% no answers. Let's see. So the largest majority not using. So about 13% not using. Okay. That's exactly what we expected, and that was more just for our purposes to understand who was joining. So let's now kind of to level set this conversation. Let's go back to school for a second here. And if you remember optimal pricing and efficient markets, and an optimal price is defined by the intersection of supply and demand. And unfortunately, in an environment where you have unsold inventory, we have a very real illiquidity case in this environment, and publishers have supply that literally can't find demand. And so, there is money being left on the table right now by just not understanding your target audience and not being able to offload this inventory in an efficient and effective way. So that's one side of the coin. Then we have to look at this whole transparency argument. And in an efficient market, the optimal zone is where transparency is the highest. And so there's two ways to look at inefficiency from this standpoint. One is, if you have a limited understanding of your target audiences and you have limited performance metrics that will actually allow ROI to dictate your CPM pricing, then you don't have transparency, and therefore you're not able to capture the highest CPMs possible. And the consideration that you need to think about is, could our direct sales model be dictating 2 or 3 times higher CPM? I mean, everyone's scared of it being lower, right? Everyone's scared of this efficiency and transparency driving CPM prices down. But in an environment where you have limited, finite inventory and premium, the chances are more likely that you're going to have multiple advertisers competing for finite space, and it will drive the right prices up in the right areas. So what we've seen today, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to share, just for those of you that are listening in, to put some very specific numbers on this. When we talk about illiquidity, you can think of how much of the inventory is actually being sold. And going back to a number that Ian shared earlier, anywhere from 25 to 90% illiquidity. Now, that is a massive problem. The market today doesn't often call it illiquidity. That's a term that really comes from financial markets and economics, but there is dramatic illiquidity, as evidenced by that number. And then on the right side, this inefficiency you can think of as the inability to be able to extract the right price for the value of the goods that you're trying to sell. And that is a dramatic number no matter how we measure it. Essentially, you are not getting fair value for your inventory.
Yeah, and I mean, publishers should not be willing to accept this, right? That not just from an inefficiency standpoint, from a kind of we don't necessarily understand our audience, but there's price inefficiency in some of what's going on today, and we'll talk about that in detail. But, the inefficiency is rampant, and so this is something that we have to consider and do something about because money is being left on the table as a result of it. Okay, so how is the industry going to change over time? And what I'm going to do right now is build a case for why programmatic is very likely going to be around for a long time, if not the avenue that you will be offloading all inventory over the next 10 years, let's say. Maybe it's even sooner. But I think there are some forces at work. There are players in this industry where they're going to be reluctant to relinquish control, relinquish profit margins, and therefore it's going to slow some of the adoption. But from a publishing standpoint, if you look at a model like this where you have the two axes, transparency and value, and over time. So if you look at kind of premium direct over time, if you don't have transparency and you aren't able to really show and demonstrate and drive that true efficiency from premium direct because it's a direct sales model and you're not doing this in an auction-based programmatic way, the value tapers off over time. And I think what's disruptive for this industry right now is we're starting to see real-time bidding, and even though it's only in remnant inventory, we're starting to see that perform very well for marketers. And they're saying, wow, that actually works pretty well. I'm seeing value. It's performance-based. but it's not the best inventory in the market. And I think that in and of itself, even though it's not as good, will start to dictate a shift in the way they're demanding premium inventory. And so advertisers and buyers are going to want more performance, more justifiable metrics to say, okay, I'm going to continue to spend in this area. And I think over time, in some cases, it's going to demand from advertisers, demand from agencies is going to pull publishers kicking and screaming in some cases into programmatic direct. And this is not going to go away, in other words. So I think the case here is eventually the benefits they're seeing from this remnant kind of, and this is classic Clayton Christensen innovative dilemma. If you've read that book, he talks about how you can kind of come in and disrupt a space. That's exactly what's happening. This remnant inventory isn't all that valuable right now, and so kind of there's stuff going on, but eventually the same processes and optimization that's being applied to that lower value inventory will start to demand change in premium. So
the other issue here is that the quality itself is becoming more competitive. So in the beginning, this was described as a remnant market. Today, what we see is increasing quality and quantity of premium and super premium inventory to the point where those publishers that are choosing only the lowest quality inventory that they have that's unsold to enter this market are finding that they are less and less competitive as this becomes a more mainstream activity. So we've crossed the chasm here. We are no longer in an emerging market. This really seems to be the way that digital media is going to be sold going forward. So quality is important, not simply that you're trying to realize a price. This will impact your homepage and better quality audiences and those things that perhaps you'd held out separately for direct sales. So expect this across the range of inventory that you have.